When we hear the words history of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians come to mind: the first cities, the first writing, the first laws. For a long time, it was believed that civilization began with them. But what if I told you this isn't true? What if, long before the Sumerians appeared on the historical scene, another mysterious culture had been preparing the ground for their rise for thousands of years? Today, we're talking about a culture that left us no written words, yet whose legacy determined the fate of all humankind. The Ubaid period covers an extremely long span of time, generally dated from the 6th to the early 4th millennium BC. Geographically, the Ubaid culture originated on the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia, in the region that later became the heartland of Sumer. However, its influence spread over a vast area, creating what can be called the first great sphere of cultural interaction in the Near East. Characteristic Ubaid ceramics and other artifacts have been found from the Mediterranean coast in the west to the mountains of Iran in the east, and from Anatolia and the South Caucasus in the north to the Persian Gulf coast of the Arabian Peninsula in the south. But who were the people behind the pottery? Where did they come from? The exact origin of the Ubaid people is a subject of scientific debate, as direct written evidence simply does not exist. However, based on archaeological data, scientists have put forward several main hypotheses. The most widespread is the autochthonous theory, which suggests the Ubaid culture developed from the earlier Samara culture of central and northern Mesopotamia. Proponents of this version believe the Sumerians were among the first to use irrigation for agriculture. Gradually, around the turn of the 6th and 5th millennia BC, their culture transformed into the Ubaid culture, and its bearers began to migrate south, systematically settling the alluvial plains near the Persian Gulf for the first time. Thus, the Ubaid people are seen as the cultural and possibly biological descendants of the Sumerians, who mastered new territories. The most powerful evidence of long-term cultural and ideological continuity is the temple sequence at Eridu. Excavations there revealed a unique stratigraphy of 17 temples, built one on top of another. This sequence shows an evolution from a simple adobe chapel in the earliest Ubaid layer to a monumental temple complex in the later Uruk period, which can be attributed to the Sumerians. Such a continuous architectural tradition, spanning over 1,500 years, indicates a stable population with enduring religious beliefs, and is a strong argument against any significant cultural discontinuities or population replacements. In contrast, the Semitic hypothesis doesn't deny local development, but proposes that the Ubaid culture was the result of a synthesis in which early Semitic-speaking groups played a significant role. This theory suggests that mobile pastoral tribes from the Syro-Arabian zone interacted and merged with the settled agriculturalists of Mesopotamia. Linguistic analysis supports this, as many names of rivers, cities, and professions in later Sumerian have Semitic roots, which may indicate a deep history of Semitic presence in the region. A compelling alternative is Gil Stein's sphere of interaction model, which views the Ubaid phenomenon not as a monolithic ethnic or political unit, but as a complex polyethnic network of different communities united by a common material culture and ideology. Evidence for this includes the combination of a widespread stylistically homogeneous ceramic style with significant regional differences in other aspects of culture. For example, while southern Mesopotamia is characterized by monumental temples, suggesting centralized religious authority, other regions, such as Hamrin, feature large elite houses, indicating a social hierarchy centered around powerful households. This demonstrates that a shared Ubaid identity did not mean a unified political or social structure. The Ubaid world was a collection of diverse groups, farmers, herders, and fishermen, united by a common set of cultural tools and symbols rather than a common origin. The material culture of the Ubaid people demonstrates a high level of skill and ingenuity. Its hallmark is its ceramics, high-quality, well-fired ware, often made on a slow potter's wheel. It frequently had a characteristic greenish tint and was decorated with complex geometric patterns applied in brown or black paint. In agriculture, tools made of fired clay, such as sickles, were widely used, a rational solution in a region with scarce stone and wood. The Ubaid period also marks the birth of metallurgy. Archaeologists have found the first copper products, mainly small ornaments and tools, testifying to the development of metalworking. The ingenuity of the Ubaid people was also manifested in their use of local resources. They actively used bitumen as a waterproofing material for building houses and boats. The discovery of a ceramic boat model in Kuwait confirms they were skilled mariners, able to navigate the rivers and coasts of the Persian Gulf. In terms of social organization, early Ubaid communities were probably relatively egalitarian, with little social differentiation. However, over time, as the population grew and wealth accumulated, clear signs of social stratification appeared. From the archaeological evidence, the most interesting example, in my opinion, is the 20-room residence at Tel Abada, Building A, which stood out significantly against the background of ordinary dwellings and probably belonged to the elite. The presence of an elite is also indicated by the uneven distribution of burial goods in the graves. Indeed, some graves contain luxury items such as gold foil, ivory combs, and imported materials, indicating the existence of a wealthy stratum of society. To explain this new social organization, scientists, in particular Gil Stein, proposed a model of leadership. However, it must be said here that the Ubaid chiefdoms differed significantly from the classical models known from the ethnography of Polynesia or Mesoamerica. Power in classical chiefdoms is often based on control over prestigious exotic goods and demonstrative military might. In Ubaid, there is little convincing evidence of large-scale warriors or the wide circulation of luxury goods as markers of status. Instead, the power of the Ubaid elites was probably based on control over the production and redistribution of basic foodstuffs, primarily grain. This model was called staple finance, i.e., financing through staple products. Elites mobilized surplus crops from the common population, using not so much coercion as ideology and rituals, in which the temple played a central role. If we talk about monumental architecture, the most vivid example of its evolution is the temple complex of Eridu, one of the oldest and most important Ubaid cities. Excavations here have revealed a unique sequence of 17 temples built one after the other over a period of more than 1,000 years. In the early stages, everything started with a tiny one-room shrine, measuring approximately 3 meter. In the middle stages, the temples gradually increased in size and became more complex. They acquired standard elements of Mesopotamian cult construction: the altar, the podium in the niche opposite the entrance, the table for offerings in the center of the hall, and the orientation of the corners of the building according to the cardinal points. In the late stages, the temple reached its canonical form, which became the prototype for all future Mesopotamian temples. It was a monumental building on a high platform, which had a 3-part layout: a long central hall and 2 rows of side rooms. The staple finance model and the evolution of the Temple of Eridu were 2 sides of the same process. The temple was not just a place of worship, but also a central economic institution, a kind of grain bank, where harvest surpluses flowed in the form of donations or taxes. The architectural growth of the temple, its transformation from a small chapel to a majestic structure, is a direct physical reflection of the growing economic and ideological power of the priestly elites. This theoretical model of power, where the religious center is at the same time economic, was inherited and developed by the Sumerians, for whom the temple remained the heart of every city-state. The Sumerians appeared around the 4th millennium BC. Where they came from and what their origins were is unknown. But what is known is that under the influence of the Sumerians, the Ubaid culture began to change greatly, and on its soil emerged the Uruk culture, which scientists attribute to the proto-state or early state stage of the development of an already Sumerian society. It was during this period that the key elements that define the Sumerian civilization were formed. The most noticeable change in archaeological materials is the transformation of ceramics. Ubaid elaborate painted pottery, produced in relatively small batches on a slow potter's wheel, is replaced by the mass production of standardized, coarse, unpainted ware made on a fast potter's wheel. This change does not reflect a decline in craftsmanship, but fundamental changes in the economy itself and social organization. Society needs utilitarian tableware in huge quantities. Settlements also undergo great changes. If the Ubaid period is the time of the birth of large centers such as Eridu, then the Uruk period becomes an era of urban explosion. Settlements reach unprecedented sizes. The city of Uruk itself is turning into a real metropolis, dominating its surroundings. Although the largest city of the Ubaid culture, Eridu, with its 1,000-year history of temple construction, was the ideological predecessor, it was Uruk that seized the initiative, becoming the main political and economic center. However, although the monumental temples of Uruk, built in the Iana precinct, were significantly larger than any structure of the Ubaid period, they still preserve their basic architectural principles, demonstrating the direct continuity of traditions. The question of the ethnic composition of the population and the nature of the interaction between the Ubaid people and the Sumerians still remains open. One hypothesis suggests that the Sumerians were a newly arrived people of unknown origin who gradually assimilated the local Ubaid population. This theory can be supported by the fact that some names of early rulers in the Sumerian royal list have a Semitic sound, which may indicate the Semitic affiliation of a part of the Ubaid population. However, the scenario of gradual integration and cultural synthesis seems more likely. Large centers such as Eridu were probably melting pots where different groups merged: settled Ubaid farmers, nomadic Semitic herders, and perhaps the Sumerian-speaking newcomers themselves. The Ubaid culture itself, taking into account its wide geographical distribution, was most likely polyethnic, which makes the process of transition to the Sumerian civilization look like a complex cultural synthesis, rather than a simple replacement of one people by others. The Sumerians inherited not just a set of technologies or beliefs, they inherited a complete system carefully developed by the Ubaid people to survive and thrive in the unique and difficult conditions of the alluvial plains of southern Mesopotamia. This system, which included irrigation, a temple economy, and a hierarchical social structure, was so efficient and interconnected that any new group arriving in the region was forced not to replace it, but to integrate into it. Therefore, the Sumerian civilization is not so much the invention of a completely new people, but the next stage of development, a kind of upgrade of the Ubaid socio-ecosystem. How can we talk about Ubaid culture and not mention reptilians? Perhaps the best known and most intriguing mystery of the Ubaid culture is the strange terracotta figurines found at many sites, including in Ur and Eridu. These figurines depict humanoid creatures with human bodies, but with disproportionately elongated lizard-like heads, almond-shaped eye slits, and elongated snouts. They are found both in residential areas and in cemeteries. Some figurines depict women nursing babies with the same features. Others hold staffs or scepters, or wear elaborate headdresses, which may indicate their special status. It must be said that the meaning of these figurines is still the subject of fierce debate. There are several main interpretations in the scientific community. First, the main interpretation is religious. The most common theory is that they are representations of deities, spirits, or other supernatural beings. Reptilian features could symbolize a connection with water, fertility, or chthonic forces. One of the most scientifically based hypotheses connects the elongated heads of the figurines with a real cultural practice: artificial deformation of the skull. Anthropological findings confirm that during this period, some people practiced tightly wrapping the heads of babies to give them an elongated shape. It was probably a sign of a high social status belonging to the elite or the priestly estate, and the figurines depicted such people. Unfortunately, the uniqueness and strange appearance of these figurines have made them a popular subject for pseudo-scientific speculation, including various theories about ancient astronauts and reptilian aliens. It is important to emphasize that such theories have no scientific evidence and ignore the wealth of cultural and anthropological explanations, which are much more grounded. However, scientific theories do not completely shed light on this phenomenon. Greetings. When we talk about ancient Egypt, majestic pyramids, powerful pharaohs, and the golden treasures of Tutankhamun immediately come to mind. But have you ever wondered what came before them? Who laid the foundation for this incredible civilization, and how? Today we will journey thousands of years into the past, to an era before there was a unified Egypt, before hieroglyphs and the first dynasty. We will delve into the world of pre-dynastic Egypt and explore its heart, the mysterious and influential Naqada culture. It was this culture that became the cradle from which the state of the pharaohs was born. So, make yourselves comfortable. We are beginning to uncover the secrets of Egypt. And we'll start with the fact that the Naqada culture is an archaeological culture of pre-dynastic Upper Egypt, which existed from the 4th to the 3rd millennium BC. It is considered the direct predecessor and foundation of the pharaonic civilization, within which the key elements of Egyptian royal power, religion, and art were first formed. The study of this culture is inextricably linked to Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, as his excavations in 1894-95 were the first systematic attempt to understand this pre-literate period in Egypt's history. His work provided the first scientific method for organizing the past in the absence of written sources. The sequence dating system developed by Petrie was based on the typological evolution of pottery found in the tombs of that time. He meticulously documented changes in its form and material, particularly the appearance and disappearance of certain types. Thus, he divided the general Naqada culture into 3 main phases, named after key sites: Amratian, Girzian, and Sumerian. When he developed his system at the end of the 19th century, he understood that his chronology was based only on the archaeological finds available at that moment. He assumed that even older cultures or earlier stages of the pre-dynastic period might be discovered in the future, preceding the earliest burials known to him. Therefore, having arranged all the finds known to him into a relative chronological sequence, he divided them into 51 groups and arbitrarily assigned them numbers from SD 30 to SD 80. The numbers before SD 30 were deliberately left vacant so that if older artifacts were discovered, they could be added to the beginning of the scale without destroying or changing the already created and published system. In his 1957 work, the German Egyptologist Werner Kaiser significantly improved Petrie's system, establishing a 3-part structure now known as Naqada 1, 2, and 3. Kaiser's system, known as Stufen, divided the periods into subphases. For example, Naqada 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, which allowed for a more detailed analysis of cultural changes based on ceramic assemblages from numerous sites. Research by modern scholars generally confirms the sequence established by Petrie and Kaiser, although they suggest that the transition to the first dynasty occurred more rapidly than previously thought. But let's return to the pottery. After all, it is one of the markers by which scientists not only distinguish periods from one another, but can also peer deeper behind the scenes of this mysterious world. Initially, during the Naqada 1 period, potters created true works of art. The most popular were elegant red vessels with a black rim polished to a shine, the result of a masterful firing technique. But even more interesting were other pots, on which the first narrative scenes in Egypt's history were painted with white paint. Hunters pursuing animals or landscapes of the Nile River. These drawings were not just decoration, they reflected one of the main ideas of the Egyptians: the human desire to establish order and control over the wild, chaotic world of nature. Over time, during the Naqada 2 period, everything changed. Exquisite handmade pottery began to be replaced by new styles that indicated mass production. Cream-colored vessels with red drawings appeared, but it should be noted here that the drawings themselves also changed. Instead of hunting scenes, artists now depicted large boats with standards and mysterious female figures, with arms raised to the sky. Perhaps these were goddesses or priestesses performing some ritual. Thus, we can assume that the society of this period became more concerned not so much with the struggle against nature, but with religious ceremonies and social life. At the same time, a huge amount of simple, rough pottery appeared, which was used in daily life. This meant that pottery had turned into an industry. Finally, in the Naqada III period, when Egypt was already on the threshold of unification, decorative drawings almost disappeared. Functional, standardized cylindrical jars, ideal for storing and transporting wine or oil, became mainstream. And it is on these utilitarian vessels that we find something extraordinary. The first hieroglyphs, or proto-hieroglyphs, which indicated the contents or the owner. Pottery became an instrument of administration and trade. The evolution of an ordinary object tells this story even more vividly. Pallets for grinding cosmetics. At the beginning, in the Naqada I period, it was a simple functional tool. A small rectangular or diamond-shaped tile made of schist, on which the green mineral malachite was ground to make eye paint. In the Naqada II period, pallets suddenly began to change shape. Now they were carved in the form of animals that lived in the Nile: fish, turtles, birds. As we can see, a simple utilitarian object is already acquiring symbolic meaning. It's even possible that such a pallet served as an amulet, intended to protect the owner or transfer the power of the animal depicted on it. But the most amazing thing happened at the end of the Naqada II period and the beginning of Naqada III. Pallets transformed into large, masterfully carved monuments, completely unsuitable for grinding pigments. They became what Michael Hoffman aptly called artifacts of power. Complex scenes were now depicted on them. A lion devouring enemies on the battlefield pallet, or the culminating scene on the famous Narmer pallet, where the king raises a mace over a defeated enemy, thereby proclaiming the unification of Egypt. Pallets became like stone billboards, glorifying the ruler's power and his divine right to rule. As we can see, by following the development of pottery and pallets, one can trace the very history of Naqada culture society, as ordinary functional items gradually transformed into symbols of status, power, and complex ideology. A simple slate pallet made the journey from a tool for grinding cosmetics to a monumental work of state propaganda. This is not just a change in art, it is a direct reflection of how power was concentrating in the hands of an elite, which was preparing to rule one of the greatest states the world had ever known. Speaking of society, it should be noted that at the beginning, in the Naqada I period, society resembled a mosaic of small, autonomous settlements. People lived more or less equitably, and this is evident from their burials, where each grave was a simple oval pit, with the deceased placed in a contracted position. They were given pots with food, jewelry, and stone pallets. No one stood out with excessive wealth, at least not after death. But over time, during the Naqada II period, this equality began to disappear. In the cemeteries alongside the ordinary graves, burials began to appear that were striking in their size and wealth. These were the tombs of the new elite, chiefs, and nobility, who could afford luxuries unavailable to others. Thus, through the language of graves, we see the birth of social hierarchy, or inequality. The most famous tomb of this period was the so-called Painted Tomb, or Tomb 100, in Nekon. The tomb was discovered by British archaeologists James Quibell and Frederick Green at the end of the 19th century. But, unfortunately, due to the imperfection of conservation methods at the time and the threat from agricultural work, the tomb itself was lost. Archaeologists managed to remove fragments of the painting from the walls and make watercolor copies, thanks to which we can study this outstanding work of art today. Thus, on the ancient plaster, a whole epic unfolded. A majestic procession of sacred boats sailed along the eternal Nile, accompanying the ruler's soul into the afterlife. Nearby, hunting scenes unfolded, where the order of civilization triumphed over the wild chaos of nature. But the most important figure was the ruler himself. Here he is. Like a deity, he stands between two huge lions, taming them. A true master of beasts. And here he is in another role, that of a formidable warrior, raising a club over bound enemies. This image, the image of the victor, would be copied hundreds of years later by every pharaoh from Narmer to Rameses. So, we can assume that the walls of this tomb were not just decoration. They proclaimed the birth of a new ideology, the absolute power of the ruler, who stands above both people and nature. By the Naqada III period, the gap between the rich and the poor had become even wider. The tombs of rulers turned into monumental structures, filled with treasures, including rare imported goods. In general, the most outstanding tomb of that time can, without exaggeration, be called Tomb U, or as it is also called, the tomb of King Scorpion I, discovered in 1988 by a German archaeological expedition led by Günter Dreyer. This tomb became a true architectural revolution for its time. Unlike the modest burial pits of his predecessors, this was a huge underground palace for eternity, which by its scale and complexity demonstrated the incredible power and wealth of its owner. The tomb consisted of 12 separate rooms, built of mud brick. At the very heart of this labyrinth was a spacious burial chamber, intended for the king himself. And around it, like faithful servants, huddled smaller storage rooms for numerous offerings. The ancient architects conceived it not just as a grave, but as an eternal home that imitated a real dwelling. This brilliant idea so impressed descendants that this very tomb became the prototype for the grand royal tombs and mastabas of future eras, establishing the tradition of building a house for eternity. But the most interesting find, in my opinion, was the small, exquisite plaques of ivory. Each of them, no more than a few centimeters in size, had a small hole so it could be tied to something with a string. But the most important thing was on their surface. These were not just ornaments. Neatly scratched on these tags were signs, simple but recognizable images of animals, plants, mountains, and buildings. On many of them, a scorpion was clearly carved, which became the main evidence of who owned this tomb. Other signs were even simpler: notches, lines, and circles, which, as it turned out, denoted numbers. At first, it might have seemed that these were amulets or ritual objects, but when scientists put all the pieces of the puzzle together, they realized they were holding something much more important. These were the world's oldest labels. The significance of these small tags turned out to be simply colossal, forcing historians to rewrite entire chapters on the dawn of civilization. Suddenly, it became clear that Egyptian writing was born not to record great myths or sacred hymns, but out of a purely practical need for the accounting and management of the resources of a vast, emerging state. This discovery not only aged Egyptian writing by several centuries, but also, most importantly, proved its independent origin, destroying the old theory of borrowing the idea from Mesopotamia. Furthermore, the geographical names deciphered on the tags, like dots on an ancient map, outlined the true scale of King Scorpion's realm. His power and trade connections extended for hundreds of kilometers, uniting disparate lands under a single control long before the first pharaohs. Thus, these modest bone plaques told a grandiose story not only about the birth of writing, but also about the birth of the Egyptian state itself. If we talk about religion, since there are no texts, scientists rely only on archaeological finds. Burial customs tell us how the people of the Naqada culture imagined life after death. They believed in the importance of preserving the body. The deceased were buried in the dry desert sand, where the bodies dried out and were preserved naturally. This belief that the body is necessary for the afterlife became the basis for the later complex practice of artificial mummification. The graves were filled with everything necessary for eternity: food and drinks in pots, tools, weapons, and jewelry. This indicates that the afterlife was imagined as a continuation of earthly life. Human figurines were also placed in the graves, especially female ones, with mysteriously raised arms. Scientists believe that these are not portraits of the deceased, but images of goddesses, mourners, or participants in rituals, who were meant to magically ensure the rebirth of the deceased in the afterlife. Predynastic religion was not something separate from everyday life. It was closely intertwined with political power. The main themes in art, victory over chaos, military triumph, divine patronage, were all aimed at one thing: the legitimization of the elite's power. The most popular gods, such as Horus, came from the most powerful cities. Therefore, the religion we see in the archaeological record is not a popular belief, but a state religion in its infancy, whose main function was to explain and justify why enormous power should be concentrated in the hands of one ruler. At the same time, the elites did not invent a new religion from scratch. The basic beliefs, the need to preserve the body and provide the deceased with provisions, existed throughout the entire Naqada period. The rulers simply took these generally accepted ideas and monumentalized them. The royal tomb is not something fundamentally new, but simply an incredibly enlarged and enriched version of an ordinary person's grave. The logic was the same. You need a home and provisions in the afterlife. But while a few pots and a pit were enough for a common person, an underground palace with hundreds of jars of wine and sacrificed servants was built for the king. By embracing a common belief on a scale unattainable for others, the elite demonstrated their superhuman status. Thus, relying on conservative and universally understood religious ideas, they justified a new, radical political inequality. But how exactly did the disparate lands along the Nile turn into the world's first great state? This is one of the most interesting questions in ancient history, and there are several fascinating answers to it, resembling different versions of the same event. The traditional version, which can be called unification by mace, asserts that a powerful king from the south, probably named Narmer, conquered the northern lands by force. The main evidence for this is the famous Narmer palette, where we see the king raising a mace over a defeated enemy, and on the reverse side, inspecting rows of decapitated prisoners. It is a vivid picture of violent unification. But when archaeologists began digging in the north, in the Nile Delta, they found no traces of a great war, such as destroyed cities. Instead, as the scholar Vinca Culture noted, they saw that over the centuries, the local culture slowly dissolved into the southern one. It looked less like a conquest and more like cultural assimilation. The southern Naqada culture, with its more advanced crafts, gradually displaced local traditions. This brings us to the third, deepest idea, proposed by scholars like Toby Wilkinson. He argues that the Narmer palette is not so much a historical record as a powerful work of propaganda. Its purpose was not to document one specific battle, but to create and spread an ideology according to which the king is the divine guarantor of order, triumphing over chaos. So, where's the truth? Probably somewhere in the middle. The Narmer palette is the official story the kings wanted to tell, a story of heroic conquest, and the clay pots in the north tell a more, everyday story of slow cultural change. Perhaps the process was predominantly a peaceful, cultural, and economic colonization, interrupted from time to time by outbreaks of violence against those who resisted. These bloody episodes were then immortalized in royal art as the official version of unification. But the real unification was, first and foremost, ideological. Egypt's success lay not only in military strength, but in the creation of an incredibly powerful idea of a divine king, the only force capable of defeating chaos and maintaining cosmic order. This idea proved so compelling that it ensured the civilization's stability for over 3,000 years. Therefore, the unification of Egypt was not just a joining of territories, but the triumph of a powerful ideology that became the operating system for the entire society. Hello. What if I told you that, long before the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Mesopotamia, and the megacities of Tripilia, a culture flourished in the heart of Europe that already knew the secrets of metallurgy, built cities, and perhaps invented the oldest system of writing? Today, we are talking about the Vinca culture. Who were they? How did they live? Why did their enormous cities disappear? And what do these mysterious symbols mean? In this video, we will dive into the world of Old Europe, the lost world of the Vinca culture. Get ready, because we are traveling 7,000 years back in time. On the banks of the Danube, near modern-day Belgrade in Serbia, lies an archaeological site known as Vinča Culture. It was here in 1908 that Serbian archaeologist Miloje Vasic, respectfully called the father of Serbian archaeology, began systematic excavations that continued intermittently until 1932. The result of his titanic work was the monumental 4-volume publication Prehistoric Vinca. This work first introduced the world to the incredible richness of the newly discovered culture. Thousands of anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figurines, tools made of stone and bone, and the characteristic dark, burnished pottery that became the culture's hallmark. However, Vasic's own interpretation of these finds is a cautionary tale about how dominant scientific paradigms can influence a researcher's conclusions. Initially, in 1906, he correctly identified the settlement as Neolithic, but over time, his views changed radically. He argued that Vinca was not a Neolithic settlement, but an early Bronze Age colony. Interpretation of data by the scientists themselves. The scientific understanding of the Vinca culture was corrected and deepened only after Vasic, thanks to the work of subsequent generations of Serbian archaeologists. The works of Dragoslav Srejović and Milutin Garashanin played a key role in this process. Srejović, in particular, in his dissertation on Vinca figurative art, focused on interpreting the art and belief systems of this culture. Garashanin, for his part, was one of those who definitively established the correct chronological and cultural context of Vinca, firmly anchoring it within the Balkan Neolithic. Modern excavations, which resumed in 1978 under the direction of Nikola Tasic, used advanced methods that revealed the full depth of the site's stratigraphy. A cultural layer 10.5 meters thick was discovered, testifying to millennia of continuous habitation. Srejović poetically described this layer as a luxurious carpet, woven from the red, yellow, and black remains of burned huts and destroyed settlements, preserving the treasures of the past. In general, the question of how exactly the Vinca culture emerged around 5400 BC has become central to the study of the European Neolithic. The debate centered around two main models, one arguing that the culture was the result of local evolution, and the other that it was the product of external migration. In the second half of the 20th century, the theory of autochthonous local development became dominant. This model asserts that the Vinca culture developed directly from the preceding Starchevo culture, whose representatives, in turn, came to the Balkans from Anatolia about 1,000 years before the rise of Vinca, bringing with them the skills of farming and a sedentary lifestyle. The first settlers of Vinca Culture were likely colonists from the broader Starchevo cultural sphere, living in tent-like dwellings with foundations dug into the lowest soil. It was they who laid the agricultural foundation on which the much more complex Vinca culture later flourished. The most famous proponents of this theory were the British archaeologist Colin Renfrew and the American researcher Ruth Tringham. For instance, in his 1969 work, The Autonomy of the Southeast European Copper Age, Renfrew argued that changes in pottery, settlement structure, and technology could be explained by internal social and economic processes, rather than an influx of new populations. This view was reinforced by the radiocarbon revolution, which provided independent dates and showed that many European achievements, including early metallurgy, were older than their supposed Eastern counterparts. The opposing hypothesis is that the Vinca phenomenon was caused by a second wave of migration from Anatolia to the Balkans. This view was shared by early researchers like V. Gordon Childe in his 1929 work, The Danube in Prehistory, and later supported by archaeologists like Garshanin. They based their arguments on the typological similarity between the material cultures of the Balkans and the Middle East. Vasage himself, with his theory of Ionian colonization, was an early, albeit extreme, proponent of this diffusionist thinking. This outdated model viewed prehistoric Europe as a passive periphery, receiving cultural impulses from a single cradle of civilization in the East. Thus, the dispute over the origin of Vinca was not just about pottery styles. It was more about whether prehistoric Europe was an active center of innovation, capable of independently creating complex societies. The Vinca culture became key evidence for the school of autonomy, demonstrating that complex societies could arise in Europe without direct stimulus from the East. The economic basis of Vinca society was a highly effective mixed subsistence strategy. Agriculture was intensified with the introduction of high-yield crops like bread wheat and the wider use of barley. Animal husbandry, with an with no yards, suggesting some form of urban planning. Some houses may have had 2 floors, ovens, and special pits for garbage. As for burials, things are not so simple here. Although burials are found within Vinca settlements, they generally belong to either preceding or succeeding cultures. For example, at the famous Vinca Belo Berdo settlement, a large grave was found, but it belonged to the earlier Starcevo culture. Copper Age graves were also discovered there, which also have no connection to the Vinca culture. As archaeologist Nenad Tasic notes, only about 120 deceased individuals have been found across 400 settlements, spanning 800 years. This circumstance makes any conclusions about a standard burial rite very difficult. Thus, archaeologists do not have a clear answer to the question of how the Vinca culture buried their dead. The absence of graves suggests that other ways of handling bodies may have existed, which, well, leave no archaeological traces. The most revolutionary achievement of the Vinca culture, however, was the independent invention of copper metallurgy, effectively marking the beginning of the Metal Age in Europe. Archaeological data from sites like Belovod and Plochnik in Serbia have provided reliable evidence of high-temperature copper smelting, dated to around 5000 BC. The Plochnik site is of particular importance. Excavations revealed a complex furnace with clay tube-like air vents, tuyere, and a chimney, a construction more advanced than those that appeared even centuries later. Among the artifacts found are numerous copper tools, such as axes and chisels. But the most astonishing thing is that a 2013 analysis of a tin-bronze foil found at Plochnik dated it to approximately 4650 BC, with a tin content of about 12%. This is the oldest tin-bronze artifact found in the world, pushing back the timeline for this complex alloy by 1500 years and proving its independent invention in Europe. This discovery fundamentally changes the history of technology. It not only refutes the long-standing diffusionist model, according to which metallurgy spread from a single center in the Middle East, but also points to the non-linear nature of technological progress. After the discovery of advanced tin bronze, around 4650 BC, there is a long hiatus. The next horizon of bronze in Serbia appears only in the 3rd millennium BC, and it's a completely different type. It's arsenical bronze. This means that this revolutionary technology was lost. Such a cycle of boom and bust refutes the simplistic progressive narrative of technological history and suggests that innovations in prehistoric times were quite fragile and could be lost due to social collapse. One of the most intriguing higher centuries. Be that as it may, the most common view is that the symbols had religious significance, but did not encode language. They could have been abstract representations of deities, prayers, or vows made during domestic rituals. The fact that they are often found in garbage pits or buried under houses suggests that the objects were used in a ceremony and then ritually discarded. The controversy surrounding the Vinca symbols is, in essence, a dispute about the definition of writing itself. The modern Western perspective often links writing with administration and the phonetic recording of language. The case of the Vinca culture challenges this, suggesting that the earliest systematic use of signs in Europe may have been driven by ritual and ideology, not economics. The Mesopotamian model for the origin of writing is linked to the state's needs for accounting and administration. The Vinca symbols appear in a society lacking evidence of a centralized state or hierarchy. Therefore, if writing is defined purely as an administrative tool, the Vinca symbols fail the test. However, if the definition is expanded to include any standardized system of graphic signs used to communicate complex ideas within a community, then the Vinca system might qualify as a unique, non-administrative form of writing. Another source of intense scholarly debate is the thousands of enigmatic figurines found at Vinca culture sites. They have become a central element of the influential but rather controversial goddess theory. In her works, such as The Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, Maria Gimbutas developed a powerful interpretive model. She argued that the vast majority of anthropomorphic figurines, which are predominantly female, represent a single supreme great goddess and her various aspects, such as the bird goddess with a beak-like face. Gimbutas saw these figurines as evidence of a goddess-centered religion that permeated the broader civilization she called Old Europe. She characterized this society as peaceful, sedentary, egalitarian, and matrifocal, that is, centered on women. This peaceful world, in her view, existed for millennia before being destroyed by patriarchal invaders from the East. In contrast to Gimbutas's theory, many researchers propose various alternative functions for these figurines, instead of a single religious explanation. For example, Dragoslav Srejovic interpreted the figurines as cultic and magical tools used in rituals, possibly related to folklore traditions. Many figurines depict detailed clothing, skirts, blouses, jewelry, and hairstyles, suggesting they might have partly served as representations of real people and contemporary fashion. Some smaller figurines have holes, indicating they may have been worn as amulets or suspended from clothing. A crucial find from the Stubline site provides unique insight into a possible social function. A group of 43 figurines was found on the floor of a house in front of an oven. The figurines are nearly identical, with bird-like heads, except for a central, larger figure. 11 of them held miniature models of tools or weapons. Interpretations of this scene vary. They could be game pieces, a depiction of a clan council with the larger figure as the chief, or symbols representing a band of warriors setting out on an expedition, for whom prayers were offered in their absence. Thus, the Vinca figurines are a classic example of the profound ambiguity of prehistoric art. The same objects can serve as evidence for both a peaceful feminist utopia and a society preoccupied with clan politics and warfare. The find at Stubline, with its armed figurines surrounding a central leader figure, strongly challenges Gimbutas's purely peaceful, religious interpretation, introducing themes of hierarchy, social structure, and potential conflict. It is likely that the figurines served a multitude of functions that varied depending on the context of time and place, and were part of a complex symbolic system that encompassed religion, social identity, politics, and daily life. After nearly 2 millennia of stability and innovation, the Vinca culture began to fade. Its mysterious decline and disappearance are the subject of debates considering both internal and external factors that led to the end of this great civilization. Well, not civilization, culture. Around 4500 BC, the Vinca network began to lose its cohesion. The long-distance trade networks that brought shells and obsidian collapsed. Life in the large settlements deteriorated sharply, and the territory occupied by the Vinca population shrank. A horizon of burned buildings, marking the final level of Vinca settlement at many sites, indicates a period of destruction and possible violence. Eventually, the culture gives way to subsequent Neolithic Copper Age cultures, such as the Gumelnica culture in the east and the Lengyel culture in the northwest. Some theories link the decline to environmental and economic factors. John Chapman, in his 1981 work, suggested that after 2,000 years of intensive agriculture, economic stress caused by declining soil fertility and resource depletion became the primary cause of the decline. This view is supported by Bogdan Bruckner, who argues that this economic stress led to a period of stagnation and, consequently, social tension, forcing large extended families to break apart into smaller ones. A dramatic, though highly controversial theory was put forward by Maria Gimbutas. She claimed that her peaceful, matrifocal Old Europe was destroyed by a series of invasions by warlike, patriarchal, horse-riding Proto-Indo-European tribes. Although this theory is considered overly simplistic today, recent archaeogenetic studies have provided some support for the idea of a major population migration from the steppe into Europe during this period, associated with the spread of haplogroups R1a and R1b in Indo-European language.